All right, so let's jump right into it. Alabama, Tennessee. You and I talked about this when we were setting things up. Obviously, your model showed that the teams were pretty far apart in terms of, score and matchups, and what we expected pretty much is what we saw. I don't think either one of us called it as big as it turned out to be. But I think a lot of that is just something that the model can't show, and that's injuries, that's fatigue, that's a brutal 3 or 4 game stretch for Tennessee kind of wearing on them. So certainly I think that on the field it showed that Alabama was the better team, but I don't necessarily know that they're that, 39 points better if we see a healthy Tennessee team on the field. So why don't you tell me what you think about that relative to your model, relative to what you thought. Let's get into it.
As normal, don't necessarily disagree with anything you just said. Neither one of us going to this game thought that it was going to be necessarily that close. I thought it was going to be more lopsided than you. I can't remember. I think I had Alabama with 40-something points, I figured, and Tennessee, I think I picked it 13. I think it was 41-13, something like that was my prediction. Obviously, that wasn't that far off, as drastic as it seemed. And, we talked about it. The model doesn't really take into account injuries, and it already had Alabama 3-touchdown favorite in this game, and I said, that was probably pretty favorable. And as we both said, we kind of lamented the fact that Tennessee was so beat up,
right,
because the team Alabama played was sort of a shell of Tennessee's former selves. Now, I'm not saying that Tennessee would have beaten Alabama healthy. I don't think it's very unlikely they would have, and I think the game did end up kind of reflecting that fact. But because they were so badly beat up, it became just generally uncompetitive, unfortunately. I didn't think Alabama played a very good game watching them. I did not think Jalen Hurts was terribly impressive. I really thought he struggled tremendously, honestly, in the first half. He only had 5.5 yards per attempt, which is rather anemic. He rushed very well, but most of that also kind of came later in the game once Tennessee started getting tired. The crux of this game, which we both talked about, and I think I pretty fairly predicted, was that the linebackers would be controlling. I said that Alabama's linebackers are probably the best in the country, honestly, and Tennessee's, due to injury, without Kirkland, without Reeves-Maybin, are very, very, very poor just because they're banged up. And both teams tried to run the quarterback. Both teams tried to, gain the edge. But, Dobbs had 7 carries, including sacks, for negative 4.4 yards per attempt. I'm fairly certain that's the first time he's been held to a negative average all season. And Hurts had 12 carries for 132 yards, 11 yards per attempt. So, why is that? Is it that Hurts is better than Dobbs? No. Right now, Dobbs is the superior quarterback. The difference is, Hurts had to go against Tennessee's linebackers, and Dobbs had to go against Alabama's, and they're just absolute night and day right now difference between those two teams.
And I think Alabama fans are going to get frustrated hearing this because, the highest profile player on the best team, usually when they're undefeated, has a lot of praise heaped up on him, fair or not, and we have to put this in context because everybody has these expectations for Jalen Hurts to struggle because he's a freshman. So a lot of the praise that he gets is within the context of he's doing great for a freshman. And we see some numbers, we see how good he is as a leader, and that really isn't debatable. But if you're being as, particular about him when you judge him versus, another high-profile quarterback, you'd see that there are some holes in there, specifically in the passing game. He's got control of the offense. He's got great, ability with his legs. But what we're seeing is some inconsistencies in the passing game and a little bit more of that internal clock that's still a problem that I do think will get better as the year goes on. But it's a little early for us to be talking about, I think I saw today, dark horse Heisman candidate and a lot of this. Let's be honest, Jalen Hurts is playing great. He's playing a lot better than we would expect from a freshman. But I don't know that he doesn't have a lot of room to grow in the passing game.
I'd agree, and I think we may talk about this more in the previews when we get into what's going to happen in the future. But, I'll just say for right now, looking back on this past game, this was not a very good game by Jalen Hurts. I think from what I've seen, this was the worst, frankly, that I felt like he played all year. And, it's kind of incredible to say that the way this game went. And a lot of it was due to the fact that Alabama was so dominant that it really limited what they had to do. It's kind of an odd thing when you look at Alabama's statistics. Alabama has had one game, I guess, where they've had to play 4 quarters. And beyond that, they really haven't had to run their offense for 4 quarters all season.
And tell me, if you're not an Alabama fan, how scared are you that Alabama is basically skull dragging people without the benefit of having a great quarterback? Like, it seems like they're already really dominant, and the offense, in spite of the scores, hasn't even really clicked yet.
Yeah, again, and there's good reason, because this has to do with the model, why I'm not going into too much depth now. I'm already, been working on the model for the Alabama-Texas A&M game, and we're going to end up discussing that, because it's a little terrifying what Alabama's going to do, and later on I'll be able to put it in a little bit better context. But, yeah, we don't really know where the ceiling is right now for this Alabama offense in particular.
A little bit about Tennessee. We're going to talk a lot about Alabama in our weekend preview show, but a couple of things that stood out for me for Tennessee. One bright spot, and I mentioned it in the pre-show, was Barnett. I thought he did everything he could individually as a defensive player to keep them in that game, and for almost 2 quarters he did. He was very disruptive, and I heard a couple of talking heads knocking Cam Robinson on his job as a left tackle, giving up some sacks and some fumbles from caused by Barnett. But the guy's a stud. I mean, you're going to have some wins, some losses there, and I can't really fault Cam on that. I thought Barnett played well. I thought the defense held as much as it could. So I would like for you to touch on that point. But then another point that I want you to touch on is the offensive game plan for Tennessee. I thought was absolutely horrendous. And especially considering the fact that Alabama, you have to attack them a certain way, especially if you're undermanned and you need to score some points. And it looked to me like they were defeated coming in from a game planning standpoint, and they were just trying to mitigate the damage.
Right. Well, to that aspect, I think Tennessee kind of did what they could with the players who were available to them. Barnett was, to some degree, the whole defense. I mean, with the injuries they have, Barnett is really the one marquee player left defensively, in my opinion. There's some other guys that are pretty good, but Reeves, Maven, Sutton, and Barnett, that's the 3 guys that you look at and you go, okay, those 3 guys can play ball. They're going to make something happen. And with Sutton and Reeves maybe down at the second and third level, they just don't have a lot. So, I think Barnett is a stud. I think he showed that. And I think he's going to be something of a terror for everybody the rest of the season, much as he has been up until this point. And then to kind of go on to the next question as to the game plan, I've been really critical of the offensive coordinator all season. We've talked about that. I've said some of it has been by design. And as I said, week 1, this is a zone read offense, and it's not a very sophisticated one. And when they played Appalachian State, Virginia Tech, and Ohio, and they really tried to limit just how much they used Josh Dobbs and the way they used him, and basically every one of those games they broke down and ended up running him a lot at the end of the game to pull ahead. But if you run the zone read offense, you have to read the edge defender. You're leaving a guy unblocked intentionally. You're trying to get a numbers advantage. You can get the edges. That breaks down if you have interior pressure on the offensive line, first off, which they're seeing right now. And that breaks down if the exterior defenders are faster than your players. So if Dobbs, keeps the ball in an inside zone read and goes outside, it doesn't work if Reuben Foster's out there and he just runs you down. And that's a lot of what we saw in this game. And they never really attempted to establish Dobbs as a runner in this ball game, which I'm still a little surprised at, frankly. Dobbs all season had been the primary ball carrier. I mean, he's had double-digit carries in every game, save for that App State game to start with. Every game he's had double-digit carries, 14, 14, 17, 11, 17 carries. And in this one, he only had 7. And, he also was averaging, about 4 yards a carry going into this game. And, if you're going to run the zone read, again, you've got to stick to it. I kind of felt like they were protecting Dobbs much of the same way they were earlier in the season. It's almost like DeBoer just sort of conceded that they couldn't really run it and they didn't want to get his quarterback injured. But the problem is if you're going to run that style of offense and you're going to not make the proper keys and reads, and maybe this is Dobbs getting a little shy at the point of attack, you're just leaving an unblocked guy to crash in the run game. So the run game completely stalled. And then the flip side, I didn't really feel like they used the receivers very effectively. They tried to have a true downfield passing game. They were woefully inadequate in protection. But the stat that sticks out to me is there were only 2 receptions by Alvin Kamara in this game. The one thing I felt like they really could have gotten an edge is Kamara versus the middle linebackers of Alabama. Reuben Foster is very, very athletic. In my opinion, at this point, I think he is the best middle linebacker they've had. I think he's probably better than Rolando McClain at this point. But he's still big, and Kamara can get the edge on those guys. It's something that people have hurt Alabama with a lot, and they made no effort to attack the perimeter in the passing game. Really, all their passes really came over the middle of the field, and when they did throw in the perimeter, it was very easily read bubble screens. And as we said, I don't have a huge opinion of DeBoer. He's not really a spread guy, by by history. You can see he's kind of adopted some of these concepts. But there's a massive lack of sophistication in my view, and it really showed this game because they just, I can't really point to, again, like I said early in the season, I can't point to anything Tennessee was doing to see what they were setting up or what they were trying to accomplish. It was just a mishmash of plays out of his own replay.
And what was really crazy to me is they didn't even get any good work in after the subs came in. We've seen every Alabama game this year when they put the second line and third line in, they gave up yards and they gave up points. Well, this time they didn't, and part of it was, they're still good players, but the other part was Tennessee still didn't change anything up. They still didn't get creative. And what I think really hurts them in this is they didn't test enough things out to see what might work, which is going to bite them in the butt down the road because they're probably going to play Alabama again. If you look at their schedule, it's pretty much cake the rest of the way, and Florida's going to drop a game, which tells me that Tennessee's going to see Alabama again, and you want to have something to hang on to going into that game, and maybe they can hold on to, well, we might be healthy come December, but you also want to say, hey, we executed this well, and we can build on that, and I don't think they have anything close to that for a rematch in Atlanta, and I think it's, maybe it wouldn't matter, maybe they'd lose to Alabama again anyway, but maybe they wouldn't. Maybe a healthy Tennessee team that had a little mental boost because they had some success would have something to build on, but it doesn't look like that's the case.
No, I mean, I agree. I can't, again, can't point to anything that was done well. I think I'll give a little bit of credit here. Dormady is not the same sort of player that Dobbs is, and that sort of limited what they could do offensively. But it can't be more clear to me that they're trying to run a zone read offense. Everything's predicated on the zone read and passing concepts off of it. Very, very limited RPO playbook too. And if that zone read's not working, the offense doesn't work. Period.
It's funny because not Gary, but even Vern was pointing out the fact that they weren't taking any deep shots, and I think that's funny because when it's that obvious to everybody, even Vern, you got to be doing it. I mean, you got to take some shots against this Alabama team that's given up 400 to admittedly a better passer in Austin Allen. Had some struggles on that side of the ball. At least give it a shot, and at least give your receiver some 50-50 balls, and that never materialized either.
I'll give you some pushback there. I will say, when you watch these games and you keep clamoring for the deep shot, Tennessee had 3 long developing pass plays early in that game that resulted in sacks. The first 4 drives Tennessee had in that ball game, the first 3 ended in a 10 plus yard sack, and the fourth ended up in a pick six. So it's hard to say what those calls were, but given the pressure they were experiencing, I have no doubt they were calling some deep pass plays. They simply did not have the time to execute them. The problem was they started with a game plan, I think, where they wanted to chuck the ball deep quite a bit and try to exploit the corners. Didn't have nearly enough time to execute it. Then they lose their left tackle. Richmond comes in. However, I do agree with you that later on they abandoned it. And basically, they needed to try to lull Alabama to sleep. And later on, the pass rush wasn't nearly as ferocious in that game once they got a little tired. And Tennessee, they stopped pinning their ears back. But they kind of went full-bore pass early, tried to establish that. Didn't work. Later on, they completely abandoned it. And there was no sense of balance throughout the game. Again, I'm sorry, I just don't have a really high opinion of DeBoer as an offensive coordinator at this point.
Well, for me, I just wonder. We saw Austin Allen just take an absolute beating against Alabama, and the pass rush was pretty ferocious there too. But I just wonder if Dobbs has sort of feasted on these big shot plays this year so far. I wonder if. I don't know. Maybe there's just some deficiency there that they can overcome. But it's going to be tough for Tennessee, I think, to have much to go from this game, even with their weak schedule throughout the year. There seems to be some frustration with Butch Jones, but I wonder if he made some changes maybe at the end of the year with the offensive leadership that would put him in a position to be pretty successful, because the East still seems like it's a little down, and I think Tennessee can have some recruiting success. Do you think there's any hope for him there if he can maybe look in another direction on the offensive coordinator side?
Yeah, I mean they're not going to get rid of him right now. They're just not. But I think change needs to be made. The flip side of this being kind of their year, quote unquote, is they've got a lot of older players. Now it's still a pretty junior laden class, so if those guys come back, they're in good shape. But yeah, I think they can make some changes and probably be pretty competitive. My biggest concern is given the zone read scheme that they're running with Dobbs, what do you do when you lose Josh Dobbs? What kind of an offense do you run? Because Dormady can't run, I think, that style of offense and be anywhere near as effective. So it's going to almost take a stylistic reboot because so much is hinged off Josh Dobbs. I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the year plays out, because I think with these injuries, any one of these games could end up being tough. I mean, they're really, really beat up, and they're going to have to get healthier and not more injured. And if they can get healthier at the end of the season, we'll see how they do, probably in a rematch.